Welcome to this version of our podcast, What's the Score? Let me remind you that if you enjoyed today's podcast, or any of our podcasts for that matter, to please press the like button on whatever format you're listening to the podcast on. Also consider supporting us by joining us on patreon.com and show your support for the program that way. There'll be details to follow in the middle of the podcast. Once again, thanks for listening and enjoy today's terrific interview as well as some amazing film music. Today's program made possible by patrons like you. Welcome to where we celebrate music from the movies. From the golden age to present day, we've got it all covered. We talk to those in the entertainment industry and find out about their favorite scores. You found the podcast, What's the Score? I'm your host, Frank R. Wilson. So sit back, relax, grab a popcorn, and let's see what we'll be hearing today. Recognize that music? It's a favorite of our guest today. Now, what started out as a hobby in 2011, he's been increasingly busy with acting and directing and producing. He's been one of the most prolific producers of independent content actually in Louisiana. Some of his content, I should say, has garnered over 1 million views. So without delay, please join me in welcoming John Armijo to the program. Hi, John.
Good morning, sir.
Morning. I appreciate you joining us. I'm looking forward to it.
Yep.
As most of my listeners will know, I always like to find out a little bit more about the individual that we're going to be talking to, at least on a personal level. So I was wondering if you could take a couple of minutes and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. I am originally from Southern California.
I won't hold that against you. That's all right.
A town called Fullerton, California, which you may have heard of.
Yep.
Cal State Fullerton, I guess, was where most people would have heard of it. Right next to Disneyland, one town over from Anaheim. But I was there in California for about 27 years and then moved to Florida for a year and then been in Louisiana ever since. So since 2002, I've been here in Louisiana with no intention of going back to California. Happy to visit. I still have a lot of family and friends there, but as far as living, I'm not going back. Cost of living is insane.
Yeah. But it is a little bit off track, I guess, but it is one of the most beautiful, most spectacular places I've ever been.
Yes, and living there, people have asked me about living there, and I tell them it's the greatest thing in the world because you can walk out, especially in Southern California, you can walk out of your door every morning and say, "What do I want to do today?" And you can do it. You can go surfing in the morning, go skiing in the evening, and you want to go see any show, you can go see it. You'll never see enough. I mean, I was there for almost 30 years and never scratched the surface on what there is to do there. And it's a pretty amazing place.
Yeah, I remember in June we were house sitting for some good friends of ours in Redondo Beach.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I remember one morning getting up, and I don't know, it was kind of like in the mid 60s, kind of damp and cool, the June gloom as they call it. And I was going to drive out to Palm Springs to play golf, and I did. And it was like 110 degrees when I got there.
Right.
That big temperature differential after a 2-hour drive. Yep, I mean, it's insane.
Especially Redondo Beach, you have what they call the ocean breeze there. The coastal breeze, sorry. So most of the mornings there in Southern California are kind of overcast. Most people don't realize that in the ocean there. And, but any direction you want to go, you're going to come into a completely different environment. Mountains, desert, the beaches, and then eventually just hit pure desert for miles.
Yeah, I mean, you watch the local news. It's the most unique weather forecast you'll ever witness.
Yeah.
Because they give a coastal forecast city, valley, desert, and mountain, and they're all different forecasts. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a cool place. Like I said, I'm happy to visit. I was just
Happy with
there.
it, yeah. I hear you.
I was just
I
there
hear.
last
Well,
summer.
I'm curious, and what caused the move to Louisiana then?
Well, let's see. I got divorced in 2001, remarried, and my wife and I tried Florida for about a year and didn't really care for it. And we were trying to establish our own roots, and build a life together.
Sure.
So my wife her family is from Louisiana. My wife was actually born in Norway, and spent the first 8 years of her life in Norway, and because her father was stationed on an oil platform, being from this area, of course, and so we ended up coming to Mandeville, Louisiana, with no intention of staying. And within 2 or 3 days of being here, really, really fell in love with the place. Within 2 or 3 days of being here, really, really fell in love with the place, and been here ever since.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yep.
I'm curious. Does she speak Norwegian?
No.
That's well. I lived overseas for a while too, and it's actually. I mean, I learned like a few words in Mandarin and Cantonese and stuff like that, but I couldn't speak it. So I mean, I understand.
Now that you mentioned it, the stories I hear her mother tell is that the first couple of years she spoke a lot of it, but the further you get away from it, and they did have schools there for Americans because they had so many workers out there. They had American schools, but to this day she doesn't speak any of it.
Yeah. I loved your choice of scores of films that you were wanting to play music from. I thought it was very diverse.
That's what I was going to say, very diverse. And you know what?
And I love that. And I love that. Some of which I'm familiar with and some of which I'm not. Let's start off with the first one. One of the ones you wanted to share with our audience today was from the film called Batman Returns. We were going to play the end titles, and it's written by a very well-known and admired composer, Danny Elfman. Right. Tell me a little bit about why you chose that particular one amongst your favorites.
Well, anybody who I imagine listening to this is a fan of, movie scores.
Yeah.
And they know Danny Elfman. He's been around. He's been on the scene for, 30, 35 years at this point as a composer.
Yeah.
As a composer, and he was with the band Oingo Boingo before that. I don't know if you know that. But extremely, extremely, extremely unique composer. I want to say his first score that he did for a movie was with Tim Burton because they collaborate a lot, which I'm sure you know. But I want to say Pee-wee's Big Adventure was his first score.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I was going to say Edward Scissorhands, but I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say it's Pee-wee's Big Adventure and then Beetlejuice. And then the TV show The Simpsons. If you ever watch The Simpsons, that's what he is. Yeah. And then the first Batman movie. And then Batman Returns, I think, actually has a better score than Batman does.
Even though he did both of them.
Yeah. I don't know if he did the third one. I don't think so. But because Tim Burton wasn't on that. That was a Joel Schumacher film. But
it is interesting. It is interesting in and how sometimes directors and composers form a partnership. I mean, obviously the most famous one is Spielberg and Williams, but that's another, pretty important one as well. Burton and Elfman. Yeah,
I think once you get that collaboration, once you click like that, there's no stopping you. You can look at Marty
and especially when you look back, I don't know, back 10, 15 years or more, but before you could basically reproduce the entire score in a computer to let the director know what it was going to sound like. Mm-hmm. A lot of times you only had, the piano or maybe had a small group of musicians to try to give the director a feel of what it's going to sound like.
Right.
So that trust, especially back then, was really important between the director and the composer because, the composer would say, well, trust me, it's going to sound really great and it's going to sound like this and sound like that, but without really being able to produce it.
It's funny you mentioned that. Because I watch a lot of documentaries on film, and that's almost the exact same conversation that John Williams had with George Lucas for Star Wars. And trust me, and the crew and cast who had never seen the movie, they all thought it was a joke when they were making it, thought it was a joke when they were filming it. But when they sat down to watch the premiere for the first time and John Williams' score came on and blew the socks off the place,
It's amazing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Music actually can sometimes it can actually, I don't know if I want to go so far as to say save a film,
Mm-hmm.
but it certainly elevates it, don't you think?
Oh yeah, well, I have an interesting point on that statement. I'll come back to in a second. But
Okay.
going back to Star Wars for a second, there's always been throughout the history of film, there's always been really, really good soundtracks. But I want to say Star Wars probably, in so many categories, changed the world. But I want to say that John Williams' score probably changed the world of movies forever, just because that score was so powerful. Which leads me to the point I was going to make a second ago. So you've seen the Back to the Future films.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So they're all great movies. Steven Spielberg, Robert Zemeckis, and I want to say Alan Silvestri is the composer.
Correct. Yep.
But on that first movie, it's a lot more low budget than people actually realize. I think there's only like 2, maybe 3 special effects in the whole movie. And Robert Zemeckis, who directed it, they didn't have a lot of money for the part, and they actually had to shoot the movie twice, which further destroyed their budget.
Huh.
But he said to Alan Silvestri, listen, we don't have a lot of money for this, so I need the score to be a blockbuster score to elevate the feel of the movie. So now that I've told you that, if you go watch that movie again, you actually pay attention, you'll see how low budget that movie actually is.
Huh.
But the score takes it to this whole other level.
It's a good example. Yeah,
oh, yeah. And if you watch the movie, there's 2 special effects. One where the lightning hits the clock tower at the end of the movie, and one where the DeLorean goes through time at the beginning. That's pretty much it. Huh. I mean, some of our stupid movies have more special effects than that. We just need a better composer, I guess.
Well, let's quit talking and let the music do the talking for us. We're going to listen to a cue from the film Batman Returns. It's the end titles, and it's written by composer Danny Elfman. I noticed when I was looking at your bio on IMDb, it said something about the fact that you own a collectible toys business.
Yeah, I did that for about 25 years.
Oh, you're not currently in that anymore,
No,
or
I wrapped it up 5 or 6 years ago.
how did you get into that? That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm a weird dude, Frank. I'm a weird dude.
Oh no, I think we have a lot in common in that
Yeah.
regard. But go ahead, tell me anyway.
I've had an interesting life. So, being from Southern California, I mean, we can go on for hours. I don't know how much time you got. But growing up in the '80s, I was born in 1973, and I grew up in the '80s in Southern California. And a friend of mine in high school, named Chris, his father owned a collectibles business. They sold movie posters and collectible beer cans from years past, and toys and all sorts. And to me, I was 13, 14 years old, and into comic books and toys and all that.
Sure.
And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world that you could be a grown man and make a living doing this. And he introduced me to the world of comic conventions in like 1986, 1987.
Uh-huh.
And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And then we got along really, really well. And he used to hire me with one of my best friends, Chris, and he'd pay me $50 a weekend, and I'd go work the comic conventions with him and sell stuff. And I've always had a real love of movies and television, and that really started to fuel this also, because I got to meet a lot of movie stars and talk to them and meet directors, and it was, see them in person, have conversations. They'd buy stuff from our booth, and as the years went on, I continued to work for him. And then when I graduated high school, I said, I think I could do this, because I'm a guy that likes to do things. So I started my own little side business in addition to my regular job, and for years, I used to joke and say I buy junk and sell collectibles. Is how I would summarize it. So I did that for years, and then the internet really took off in 1995. So in 1995, I went onto eBay and I opened my own store eventually, and did that for years and wrapped it up in about 2016.
Going back to the music, it was I loved your second choice. I actually, I have to admit something. I've only seen clips of this movie. I've never seen the whole movie, and I know I need to.
All right, well, tell you what, the interview is over. I need you to sign off, go over to your television, watch this, and come back and we'll talk.
Okay, right, all right, cut. I will watch it. But I'm very familiar with the opening theme, which I love that you chose. Yeah, I just think it's so cool. And from what I know about the movie, it just fits it perfectly. So the film we're talking about is Pulp Fiction. I'm not it wasn't really sure where I found it. I guess the group that plays it is, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher this. Minotaurus? Does that ring a bell to you at all?
I want to say it's Dick Dale.
Would that be the person who wrote it, you mean, or the person who performed it?
Both.
Okay, because it wasn't obvious on what I was able to find on the internet. So I'll take your description.
It's Dick Dale and the Deltones, a surf drag band out of California, and
that makes sense.
It's an older group. I want to say, go back probably the 60s and 70s.
No, that makes sense. But anyway, this is just great, and it's a really great mirror of music and film. Marriage of music and film. Tell us a little bit about why you wanted to choose that amongst your favorites.
Well, again, going back to my own love of cinema and all, I want to say you're familiar with Quentin Tarantino. I hope.
Oh well, yeah.
You've never seen Pulp Fiction,
but I've seen some of this stuff. Yeah.
Okay. So the first movie he ever did was Reservoir Dogs, right?
Right.
Okay. So this is before the internet. I want to go back to the early '90s, and somebody gave me a copy of this tape and said, "You got to watch this thing. It's the greatest thing ever." Some low budget thing filmed in Los Angeles. And I lived in Los Angeles, or just outside Los Angeles. And I said, okay, so I watched it. And I said, this is absolutely fantastic. But it was very, very under the radar. Not a lot of people had heard of it. Not a lot of people had seen it. But that thing made its rounds on the film festival circuit. And thanks to Harvey Keitel, who financed it. I don't know if you knew that. And really, really got...
I didn't.
He got Quentin Tarantino on the radar there with his star power. And that led to Pulp Fiction, and you really got to watch it. That's your assignment for now. You got to watch this movie. It's one of the greatest movies ever made. I mean, if I pass it on the channels when I'm channel surfing to come across it, I can still sit down and watch it. I've probably seen the thing 500 times.
What people call a remote drop, I guess, right?
It is damn near a perfect. I'd say it is a perfect movie.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if I've mentioned this before in the podcast or not, and I'm not going to divert too long on this, but you mentioned Harvey Keitel.
Mm-hmm.
In my background, my wife and I owned a bed and breakfast in Vermont for a number of years in the early 2000s.
Uh-huh.
And Harvey's wife, her parents lived in the same town where we had the bed and breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
So he would come up occasionally and, spend a weekend or a week or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he started coming to our place for dinner
Mm-hmm.
because we had a restaurant with a bed and breakfast as well. What a nice guy. Very unassuming,
Mm-hmm.
very shy, like what you hear, but he was tremendous. I enjoyed our time with him. Our daughter used to play with his kid, and
Really? That's cool.
and it was great fun. But anyway, he's a nice man, and so I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad to hear that was something he had a hand in.
The funny story about that is, I guess Quentin Tarantino found out where he lived and would throw a script over his fence every day because he wanted to play this role, and he wouldn't stop bothering him. And one day, I guess Harvey was out walking his dog, and Quentin Tarantino approached him and tried to give him the script. And he said, "Please read the script." He said, "I will read the script if you promise to stop throwing the shit in my yard." And he read it, called him, and they made a date for lunch and talked about it. And Harvey Keitel came in there and said, I'm going to be in it and help him finance it. And that's why I noticed to this day, Harvey Keitel always makes a cameo in his movies, at the least, if he's not a major character.
Wow.
But,
that's interesting. That's fascinating. Yeah. No, I did not know that story.
So one cool thing about Quentin Tarantino movies is that if I love them all, but his choice of music carries those movies, and Pulp Fiction is no exception. I mean, every single song in that film, whether it's instrumental or pop culture, music is his absolutely fantastic choice.
Yeah, I think he understands the value of it and how much it enhances a film. Well, let's have a listen for ourselves. This again is the opening theme from the film Pulp Fiction. And remind me again, we think the performer and the composer is.
Oh, I want to say Dick Dale.
Okay, I'm going to take your word for it. And believe me, I have an audience that if we're wrong, they'll let me know. Yeah. Anyway, let's sit back and enjoy and have a great listen to this great piece of music. One other thing I read on your IMDb page I was surprised by this. I don't know if this is still current or not. Is it true that you actually own a DeLorean?
I don't anymore. I guess I should update that. I sold it off a while back.
Ah, rats. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
then we don't have much to talk about. Well, I mean, or was it, or did it have a time travel option on it?
A flux capacitor.
Yeah,
When
that's
I
right.
owned
Yeah.
that thing, that was always the number one question.
Oh,
Number
I'm
one question.
sure.
Anytime I drove the thing stuck around town, where's the flux capacitor? Number one question. But this is funny, going back into my childhood watching films, Back to the Future. Said one day I'm going to have one of those cars. One day I'm going to have one.
Wow.
And then the
And that,
reality kicks in is that they're not very good cars. They're money pits.
oh,
And
I can only imagine. It would have been very expensive and very hard to maintain. I would guess.
well, back before the internet, of course, when I would talk about this idea of wanting one of those, people always say, "Oh, you never find parts for it. You never find parts for it." So that was always a subconscious turnoff. But with the advent of the internet, there's a company in Humble, Texas, the DeLorean Motor Company, strangely, that went in the 90s, found the old factory in Ireland and bought all this stock, everything, and shipped it back here, including the name. And to this day, they are set up in Humble, Texas, and they own all rights to it. They have all the parts. So all you got to do is go onto their website, pull up the schematics of anything you need, and they'll ship it to you. And I'm only 6 hours from Humble, Texas, so I'd usually have my stuff the next day. And it's not a problem at all. And to this day, they still make DeLoreans. You can buy an electric one. You can buy them with all their flaws fixed. They have a repair shop. So I just gave them a really good plug.
Huh? I thought they were long gone, but it still
Nope, they still exist. Yep, and they're a new company name and very, very faulty cars. But in hindsight, I'm not a mechanic, and that was part of the turnoff for me eventually. But in hindsight, they're not really complicated cars. They're just not well designed cars.
I'm trying to remember. I mean, I guess the appeal was the futuristic design of the body and that sort of thing. Was that the?
Yeah. Who was it? John DeLorean worked for. He was very high up at GM.
Yeah, I remember
and then
that.
He left. He got upset with them and left to go create his own thing, and he ran out of money. So he got involved in some sort of. It was more of a misunderstanding than anything involving cocaine. And I'm sure you remember this. You're older than I am.
Yeah.
And that whole mix-up, but it completely tarnished his name, destroyed him, and he kind of got a raw deal in that. I think he was guilty of some stuff, more out of desperation to save his company than any sort of drug deal. He definitely did wrong, but his daughter, named Catherine DeLorean, was very, very active these days in the DeLorean community. I don't know how she keeps up with it because. But after I bought mine, I got an email from her. Hey, John, my name is Catherine DeLorean. I heard you're joining our community and just want to reach out and say hi. You need anything, holler. It's like, okay.
Wow.
Cool. Yeah. It's interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that, that's good business practice. No question about that. Oh, that's interesting. Fascinating. All right. Listen, the next score you chose is one of my favorites. And I think I told you when we were getting ready for this, it still gives me goosebumps sometimes when I hear it. We're talking about the film Forrest Gump, and we're going to play the end titles from that film, written by Alan Silvestri. And kind of tell me a little bit about why you wanted to choose that amongst your favorites.
Well, I guess coincidentally, Forrest Gump and Pulp Fiction both came out the same year. Did
they? Okay.
94, I want to say. Yeah. But again, that was a good year for films. And again, I would say damn near perfect movie, if not perfect movie. Again, Robert Zemeckis, from Back to the Future, did that. But just a perfect movie overall. And the music, there's a lot of 60s songs in there and a lot of time era appropriate music for the movie. But everything in that film was perfect, including the instrumentals from Alan Silvestri. Just really, really perfect emotional marriage. As you said earlier, just a great marriage for the music versus the visuals and the story.
It's interesting, and it sounds a little bit to me like Back to the Future, where what I mean by that is I think the expectations were very low for the success of the films.
Yes,
and yet they ended up being huge hits.
Well, the book of Forrest Gump has little to do with the movie. Like, the book is awful. It's really, really over the top, where he goes into space and he gets stuck on a deserted island, and how you take that and change it enough where you get the movie that they got out of it is a leap. And there was actually supposed to be a Forrest Gump 2, where he ends up in the back of the car with OJ and Al Cowling's going down the 405 freeway. And
are you serious?
Oh, I'm dead serious. Yeah. And they said, well, let's just. Tom Hanks said, let's just call it a day. And I think it was called. I think the movie's gonna be called Gump and Company. I'm dead serious. So, and it's where he moved into modern events, and but they got a lot out of that movie. They got the CGI, coming off of Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park.
And that was CGI. Pretty innovative at the time.
Yeah, over the top. They got the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company restaurant chain out of that, and Robert Zemeckis did that movie with Alan Silvestri, and talking about the marriage analogy used earlier. They also worked on Back to the Future together.
Yeah. Well, let's have a listen for ourselves. This is a really tremendous. It's for the end titles, but you could almost say it's kind of like an overture for the score for the entire film. So this again is from the film Forrest Gump. It's the end titles, and it's written by composer Alan Silvestri. We'll get back to our program in a minute. This program is done for the love of film and film music, plain and simple. However, it does take a huge investment in time and in fees for me to make the program work for you. And I don't sell commercial time and don't really want to on this program. Rather, I'm kind of like a public broadcasting station. I need support from listeners like you. For as little as $3 a month, you can help me offset the time spent in putting the program together. Or maybe you just think of it as leaving a tip in the tip jar. Either way, if you can join up, there will be bonuses, like an additional 10 to 15-minute segment with our guest every week. Well, we'll play additional cues as well as ask some extra questions. And it's going to be only available to patrons. How do you sign up? Well, it's simple. You go to patreon.com/what's the score, and that's all one word. That's Patreon, that's patreon.com/what's the score. Check it out. We'd be grateful for your support. That's patreon.com. One thing, full disclosure, you and I are kind of friends. In fact, I've actually worked for you a little bit on one of your projects, and
oh yeah, we've had a good time.
I'm kind of familiar with you and your story. Mm-hmm. I hope you don't mind me asking this question because I think I'd be interested to hear your answer because I think it'll be instructive to everybody who's listening. You defeated cancer a number of years ago.
Yes, sir.
And I'm kind of curious. How did that change you? If I'm assuming it did. So if it did, how did it change you having that and surviving it?
So next year will actually be my 10-year anniversary of being diagnosed and coming out of it. But you hear a lot of cancer survivors say what I'm about to say,
right?
And it is 100% true, and it is a rebirth. It is 100% a rebirth. Because up until that point, I'd never really been sick. I get a cold maybe every 10 years, get the flu maybe every 10 years. I've never broken a bone. I just don't get sick. Yeah. I had COVID and I was down for a couple of days, but I just don't get sick. So that really, really came out of nowhere when I turned 40, and it was humbling to say the least. And then I was, quote, in remission. And then 6 months later, it reared its ugly head again, where I actually had to do chemo. And I was down on my ass for 15 months, and when you're down. And you know me well enough to know that I'm a pretty active guy. I like to do things. Yeah.
That must have driven you nuts.
Literally and figuratively, yeah. It was bad. It was bad. And, when you're down, you have a lot of time to think and to come up with philosophies. But it is a rebirth. I mean, to this day, I still work as a mentor for patients, and I volunteer with a couple of different organizations that call on me from time to time. So I have no problem talking about it. I use it as an educational vehicle for others. But it is 100% a rebirth, and for me, it was really, really a big look at my own mortality. Because it scared the crap out of me. Obviously, scared the crap out of me. It broke me, completely broke me. I just threw my hands up, said, "That's it, ready to go." If I didn't have a family, I'm pretty sure I would have died.
Wow.
Yeah, it was bad. So in fact, what we're even talking about now is all the direct result from that, because I was doing films and all that before, but it was really, really after cancer. I said, all right, I'm always one to do what I want to do. I don't let anything stop me from doing the things I want to do.
Yeah.
But going into the filmmaking that we're doing now, that you're part of, was also a direct result of, listen, man, I don't know how much time I got. I've been given a second chance. There's no guarantee of a third chance. I'm going to not fart around and go do the things I want to do right now.
Yeah.
So, that's why you are on sets together. And I'd like to summarize it with the philosophy of, in order for me to live, I had to accept my death. because I'd never really faced my own mortality before.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's no. I'm not saying that in jest either.
No,
I
no,
mean,
no.
I'm impressed. That's.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wow.
Yeah. So
I
does
think
it
that's a
change you?
tremendous quote. Did you just come up
100%.
with that?
No,
Did you
no. I
just come
mean,
up with
no, that was me laying in my bed for months on end, coming to terms because, if somebody puts a gun in your face and they're going to kill you, you have about 3 seconds to come to terms with it, right? You don't have a whole lot of time to think about it. But if you have a disease which is slowly killing you, you have a lot of time to think about things. So accepting your death doesn't become a 3-second thing. It was a 6 to 9 month, maybe even longer, of being tortured by this. Like, I'm going to die, and I don't feel sick. I don't feel bad. I don't want to die, but it's happening. So you have a lot of time to be angry and to negotiate and all the, the 7 steps of grief. And
right.
there's a lot of mourning, and I had to mourn the death of old me, which was, I guess, naive. And just innocent. The old John died and the new John was reborn. I mean, the core person still exists, but my philosophies on life and a lot of things have just changed. I've always been a calm, chill dude and don't get mad very often. But I mean, I really, 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 really don't sweat the small stuff anymore.
I bet.
I didn't before, and I really don't now.
I bet.
But it also creates a bond. If you talk to a World War II vet and a Vietnam vet, even though they're years apart, they share a bond that you and I can never relate to. My mother-in-law had breast cancer, and even when I talk to people who have had cancer, I have a bond with them that I don't even have with my wife or with my kids because they've never experienced that.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's a strange thing. You're part of a club that you don't necessarily want to be a part of.
Yeah.
But there is a bond that comes with it, which I find fascinating. So it was a fascinating experience. I do think that one day it's going to come back and kill me. But in the meantime, I'm going to make some movies with you, and we're going to talk about movie scores and have a good time.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, nah, you're too tough of a guy to have it come back to you.
Too stubborn.
Yeah. Another film that you chose to highlight. We're going to play the prologue from this. Is from Little Shop of Horrors. If I documented this correctly, it looks like the composer is Bill Mitchell. Tell me a little bit about what was your thinking behind having that on the program today.
Well, people may say that's an unusual choice. Little Shop of Horrors, a musical, right? Is an unusual choice for this because we're talking about scores. I'm actually a big fan of musicals when they're done right. Some musicals I find extremely boring. I don't really care for dance numbers. I know that was a little bit cinematically before my time, the big, dance productions.
Right.
Well, I can appreciate them. They're just not for me. But a really, really well done musical. I love the producers. I thought is fantastic. Little Shop of Horrors is fantastic.
Yeah.
Because the songs within that movie really, really, really serve the story. Really, really serve the story. And they're so creatively done. So much so that even though there's a lot of, I think Little Shop of Horrors may be rated R. I haven't looked, but it's not really.
I can't remember.
It may be rated R. But the guys that did those songs, Howard Ashman and Menke, I believe his last name is. Those two guys did so well with the creativity of those songs that they went on to do for Disney, The Little Mermaid music for that movie, The Little Mermaid, not the Lion King, Aladdin, and Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, okay.
Which served the Disney Renaissance in the late 80s, early 90s, because Disney in the 80s was really, really dying. Their movies sucked. And they called it the Renaissance, starting with The Little Mermaid, moving into the 90s, and really, really putting Disney back on the map. And a lot of that goes back to the music from those 3 movies I just mentioned. Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, which almost won an Oscar, Aladdin.
Yeah.
And if you ever watch those 3 movies and you pay attention to the music in those 3 films and compare them to Little Shop of Horrors, and then one of those guys in that partnership died right after Aladdin, but before The Lion King. And the quality of the music in those movies just tanks right after that.
And that's something. And you're right. The songs in those movies are just they're fantastic. I mean, I love them.
Yeah, those soundtracks went on to be like number one on the charts for years because they were so good that everybody wanted to hear them again and again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's have a listen for ourselves. Again, this is the prologue from the film Little Shop of Horrors.
On the 23rd day of the month of September, in an early year of a decade not too long before our own, the human race suddenly encountered a deadly threat to its very existence. And this terrifying enemy surfaced, as such enemies often do, in the seemingly most innocent and unlikely of places.
You've become a filmmaker. Originally started out, as you mentioned in your bio, as a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
How did it come from? How did it move from a hobby to being something that I know darn well you spend a lot of time? I don't know how much free time you have, but whatever free time you have, you usually seem to be spending it on this quote hobby unquote. How did it become such an important part of your life from starting out as a hobby to now where it's at today?
Well, again, going back to my beginnings, when I was 4 years old, my dad was a huge Star Trek fan in the 60s and on the reruns, through the 70s.
Right.
So my dad in 1977 heard about this new sci-fi movie called Star Wars. So he took the whole family on opening day to go see Star Wars at the Mann's Chinese Theater in Hollywood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was 4 years old at the time. I didn't realize how cool that was of my dad to do that until now. So I remember seeing Star Wars and, completely blown away, changed my life. And, I got into the toys and I've always drawn. So I used to draw a lot. And But living in California and knowing the entertainment world, what it is, because living there, you're exposed to it no matter what, like living in Louisiana. Yeah. Somebody who works in oil. It's just, just the way it is. But I never, ever, 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 ever would have attempted to get involved in the entertainment industry living there, ever. So moving to Louisiana in 2011, a friend of mine had a cousin that had been working on as a background actor in films here. And I was self-employed, and he said, hey, my cousins told me they're going to start filming this G.I. Joe movie here in Louisiana. And I'm a lifelong G.I. Joe fan. 80s G.I. Joe, not 60s. But I even have a tattoo on my right arm of a G.I. Joe character.
Okay, all right, hold on. I'm going to stop you there. Mm-hmm. What's the heck's the difference between a 60s G.I. Joe, which is what I grew up with, and an 80s G.I. Joe?
Oh, it's a completely different world. The G.I. Joes, from the 60s are the 12-inch dolls and very, very generic. And the 80s is a complete storyline with there's like G.I. Joe's just the team, and there's a million different characters. And at this point, it's got 40 years of history behind it, where there's an enemy, Cobra is the enemy, and they have a Russian version of G.I. Joe called the October Guard. It is this huge mythos now. So that's what I grew up with, the comic books, the cartoons. And so when this movie rolled in and my friend said he's going to go try to get in background, I was like, he said, do you want to come with me? And I said, yeah, sure. What the hell, I'll go with you. Didn't expect anything to come of it. I said, we'll go to lunch in New Orleans or whatever. And at the time, I used to go to the gym a lot. Like I drop off my daughter at school and I go to the gym. So I was in decent shape. And I've got my buzzed head and my nice posture. You know me. And I kind of got a mean look to me. So he went and met with the casting director. And then they got done with their meeting and it came out. And I was sitting on the couch and she said, hey, are you signed up with my company, Bathurst and Casting? I said, no. Why? She says, because you have a really good look. I can get you on a lot of movies. And I paid no attention really. I said, sure.
Signed up. Okay, whatever, yeah.
Signed up. So I'm driving home from New Orleans to Mandeville, okay? 45-minute drive? In that hour drive, I got 5 phone calls from them.
Holy smokes.
Do you want to sign? We need you as a cop on this, cop on that, soldier on this. And I said, wait. And I said, the first one, I said, what is this? What's this first movie? What's it called? Because I've never done this before. She says it's called Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. And I said, I am not interested in doing any college bullshit, And she said, oh, no, this is a $190 million budget Tim Burton movie.
Holy smokes.
Well, that's what I said, but with more profanity. And I said, oh, well, sign me up. She said, we need you for like a week or two. And I said, okay. So I've never done this. But then, that day I booked 5 things as like a SWAT dude and a cop and, 21 Jump Street and all these various things, usually in a cop role. And a lot of people, me in person, so a lot of people look at me to this day and think that I'm a real cop or previous military. All the time I go into Home Depot and offered discounts and all sorts of crap. So anytime I got into movie sets, I'm a reasonably intelligent guy. They would walk up and hand me guns and say, here's what we're doing. And I'd just say, okay. So I talked to the other guys who were real cops, a real soldier, and there's a lot of downtime on movies, and I would become educated on the subject. And so I very, very quickly went from background to what they call special ability, right? And got that bump. So very, very quickly I found my niche of I'm going to become, I'll go with this because if this is what gets me hired, even though it's not my personality is rather silly, I'm going to go with it. And I used to call myself set famous. I'm set famous because I used to walk on sets and they'd say, hey, movie cop's here. Hey, it's movie cop. Hey, there's movie cop. So you notice my little joke now is America's movie cop, right? That's where that came from is, I did a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I've done 3 movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger and I've got to talk to him several times. And one conversation I had with him on a movie called Escape Plan in 2012, he said, you have to find your biggest liability and turn it into your biggest strength. Okay. Huh. And so I said, okay, well, I've been typecast as a cop. Instead of, self-deprecating about it, I'm just going to embrace it. I am America's movie cop. That's just what I am. And, I embraced it and run with it. And again, that is not my personality, but even to this day, we work on flops, which you've worked on with us for this past year. is I've taken what I have, the look and the people that I know who help us with this. You notice John Mangus and all these guys, they all look like cops because they're the friends that I made over the years working as a movie cop, right? So you start to see the theme now. All the stuff that I learned about playing a cop and all that, we brought that to the table for Flops. But I've also taken my own personality, and that's where the silliness comes from. You take what you have and you mash it together and you create something.
Well, it is interesting how important, quote, the look, unquote, is for a variety of things. I mean, just like, with maybe not so much now as I've aged a little bit, but, I used to be like the detective or the lawyer or the business executive or something like that. And that was, that was kind of the stuff that people said that I looked like. And so I mean, that's the way of the biz. There's no question about it.
Yeah, it's definitely based on your look. And then, I mean, we could cite example over and over. When there was one example, actually, a movie I did called The Whole Truth with Keanu Reeves. I've always been told like that I look authoritative, that I look like I know what I'm doing. Okay.
Yeah.
So on that movie, I got called in, and I've always been a good employee and a team player and do my job. So they've always called me back. To this day, my phone rings. And they brought me in for that movie. It was a courtroom drama. They wanted me to play the bailiff. Called me up, said, "Hey, John, we need you to come in here and movie cop for us for 2 weeks. You in?" I said, "Sure, I'm in." And then to play the bailiff. But then I had to go meet with the director, and I walked in there, and she says, whoa, stop. She said, "I want you for the bailiff, but you're intense. How would you like to be the assistant prosecutor? It's a much better role, blah, blah, blah. Can you do that?" I said, "Of course I can do that. Come on. Who do you think you're talking to?" So I got hired for that job for 2 weeks in a courtroom with Keanu Reeves. I don't know if you ever watched it, but I'm part of the 3-member prosecution against the 2-member defense, and he's a defense lawyer, and we're the prosecution. It was a great role, and I ran out of there sweating. It's like, shit, what did I just get myself into? As I'm sure you said to yourself, what have I gotten myself into, right?
Yeah.
And I had a neighbor who was a lawyer, and I have a friend who's a lawyer, and I called them and said, "Can I talk to you for 5 or 10 minutes?" And got some tips. But it is 100% based on your look, and so I was aware of you before I ever met you. Because we run in the same circles, and I had seen your picture. And your look, I can definitely see, the doctor, lawyer. I always thought you almost had an Adam West look to you, to be honest. And then I met you at a film networking event in Mandeville, if you recall.
I do.
So I make a lot of notes when I meet people because I say, "Oh, this guy's got a good look." And as you said, it always starts with, "Look, this guy's got a good look. What can I do with this guy?" And I make a mental note to circle back or to keep a role in mind for this person. And it may take a year, it may take 3 years. In your case, I think it probably took about 3 years. It's like, all right, I know as I'm writing things, I have certain people in mind for certain parts, but coming from that point of view from casting the movie, it's like, okay, I want to use Frank, but I don't want to just throw him into some gratuitous crap. It needs to make sense.
It's got to fit. Yeah.
It has to fit. So in your case, when we knew we needed a mayor, to me, it was a no-brainer. We got a mayor, and Frank said he wanted to do something with this. So that for you, that look was a perfect fit for this. And,
I appreciate that. It was great fun. It was great fun. I'm looking forward to seeing the finished product. In fact, we'll circle back and talk about that here in a little bit.
Okay.
Let's get back to the music. I noticed that you're, as you mentioned earlier, big fan of Star Trek, and there's no question about it. Mm-hmm. One of the cues that you chose was the main title from Star Trek II, which I happen to consider perhaps maybe the best of the Star Trek movies, at least of the original cast.
Yep.
Written by James Horner. Tell me a little bit about what was your thinking behind choosing that to share in the program today.
Well, everything you just said, it is regarded as probably the best of the movies. I would even challenge that by saying Part 6 is, if not equal, pretty damn close, because they both have the same director.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
okay.
Nicholas Meyer. They both have the same director, but the score so 100% serves that story, serves the suspense, serves the action. It's a damn near perfect score.
All right. Well, let's have a listen for ourselves. Again, this is from the film Star Trek II. It's the main title, and it's written by composer James Horner. A note to my listeners, I think we may have inadvertently given James Horner credit for writing this music, but in doing some research, because after listening to it, I could kind of tell it wasn't Horner's original composition. It was apparently written by composer Alexander Courage. Again, my apologies, but I wanted to correct that. Well, share with our audience, what are some of the projects that you've been producing or directing that, because I know you're very much an independent filmmaker and you've got some things going on at the moment. What are some of the things that maybe you might be known for in terms of the content that you've put out on the out there?
I helped Mike when I first got together with Michael Anglin on his project, which he was already working on, called Consequences, which is on Amazon. Right. We just wrapped up Cedar Creek. Now, Mike, we're not partners. That we're financial partners. We are completely independent companies because I just won't have partnership with anybody besides my wife. But we are loyal to each other 100%, which you've seen.
Yeah.
And, but he's on his path and I'm on my path, but we are supportive 100% of each other. So he is a big horror fan. He is more interested in doing features and taking the years required to do what needs to be done. So Cedar Creek, I want to say, is going on into its second year now, where I'm just happy to go in and have fun and have a good time. And, all the time that I worked in film, I never got to do comedy. The one time I was hired for a comedic role was for a TV show called Preacher, and it was cut. I just don't have that look to do comedy, even though that is what I want to do. So I figured if I'm going to do what I want to do, I'm going to have to do it myself. So that's where Flops came from. So the original Flops, if you've seen it, I wrote it in 5 minutes, and we took 5 hours to film it. And it was truly a parody of cops. And now about this time is when the riots were happening, the Black Lives Matter thing was blowing up, and they actually canceled the TV show Flops. Cops, because it was too controversial. So I was planning more of these things, something we could do when we had some time, and just for fun. So the first Flops is truly a parody. And if you watch it, it is obvious that it's just a cops parody. It's silly, but not too silly. But I wanted to do more of them. And I said, well, shit, this is what I wanted to do. Now the world's all controversial and nobody wants to touch it. And people did not want to come. I have a still photographer that he's like, nah, I don't want to touch that, man. A couple actors like, I don't want to touch that right now, man. And then I said, okay, well, I got a good idea here, and I'm just going to have to change my approach to it. So the approach to Flops became, okay, instead of being a cops parody, which it still will be, it is going to be a complete over-the-top, silly, stupid, ridiculous parody so that nobody can complain or find any fault with it. So we did Flops 2 Meet Your Maker, which I'm sure you've seen.
Right. And they're usually popular.
Oh God, right? Yes. Oh God, yes. Yeah, they're great. And
I was amazed at the number of views that you've gotten. And you, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I said, gosh, you must be, you monetizing this? You making some money off it? And he said, no, these are fan films, and we did it that way. Well, you tell me.
Yeah, they are definitely. I pay for it all out of pocket. Again, my motivation is to have a good time, to right. learn, and to bring people with me. So
you're not making big bucks off of these things, even though they get lots of views,
millions. On TikTok alone. It's in the millions on TikTok alone.
That's amazing.
It is, and it caught me off guard. And,
I'm sorry, but you should be proud of that, though. It's obvious that you came up with an idea that's resonated with people, and they have a lot of fun with it, and you should be proud of it.
Well, we tried. You have to try different things. Failure doesn't scare me because that's how you learn. I don't mind failing. I don't mind screwing up, and it helps Mike out because these are projects in which he can continue to practice on and try new things and do that. So when he makes something like Cedar Creek, the experience helps him to be, to get what he needs to do, and it's a learning experience for all of us, and. Right now we're working on Flops 3, The Dark Knight, which is full-blown. You're involved in a full-blown fan film. I can't make money on that, because even though we don't use specific terms, I can't use those characters and make money on it. They will shoot me. So,
let's before we run out of time, there was one other Star Trek cue that you had chosen, Star Trek 6.
I'm sorry.
It's the overture is what we're going to play. This is written by a composer. I'm not familiar with him. Cliff Idleman, I guess is how it's pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about, because you had said you thought it was a close competitor to Star Trek 2.
Oh, yeah.
I guess in terms of the film, and I guess also in terms of the music.
Have you seen Star Trek 6?
I think I have, but I've slept since then. I don't really remember a lot about it. I'm sorry.
So Star Trek 6 is the last movie with the original cast.
Okay.
And it came out in, I want to say, 91, which is right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of communism. And you grew up, I'm sure, with the original Star Trek. So you remember that those stories always mirrored real-world events in a sci-fi setting, which is what made it popular, the analogy there. So this movie mirrors the fall of capitalism and old warriors. Where do they fit into the world? And this music captures what is a murder mystery story. It is a political thriller in the Star Trek world.
Isn't that neat? That's neat. Well, let's have a listen for ourselves then. This is the overture from Star Trek 6, again written by composer Cliff Idleman. John, for those people, our listeners that are interested in kind of being in touch with you and seeing what you got going on and that sort of thing, I'm assuming you've got a presence on social media that people can follow?
Oh, yeah, very much. On Facebook, John Armijo, just type in America's Movie Cop, it'll pull up. We also have Our Fun Productions, which is my production company. You can find out about flops, whatever projects we're working on. On YouTube, Our Fun Productions. On Instagram, it is America's Movie Cop. On TikTok, it is Our Fun Productions. And on YouTube, on Snapchat, which I'm still figuring out. And we won't even mention Snapchat. I'm still figuring that one out.
Jeez. Yeah, it's gotten It's pretty overwhelming. In fact, I'm not all that spread out on all the different social medias, but
well, that is the future. It is not moving.
Oh yeah. So I mean, obviously there are lots of options for our listeners to be able to find out what you got going on and what you're doing. So that's good, and I appreciate you sharing that with us, John. Look, I've thoroughly enjoyed our chat. I hope you have as well.
Oh yeah.
I think you've got a fascinating story, and you did a great job of choosing some really terrific film music that I know our listeners are going to enjoy. So again, keep in touch with John. I promise you, I think you'll find a lot of his content very entertaining and interesting. So I want to encourage you to do that. I want to thank our patrons who are supporting the program on Patreon.com, and want to encourage you, if you're so inclined and want to help support the program, to visit us at patreon.com/whatsthescore. We would appreciate your support on that. So there's not much else left to say, I guess, really, other than the fact that, again, I appreciate you listening.
Yes, sir.
Thank our guest, John, again. And there's only one thing left to say, and that's simply this, that my name's Frank Wilson. My time's up. I thank you for yours. Thanks for listening to What's the Score?